I think budget is just a financial expression of government policies. So for it to be effective, it has to be able to communicate to the public for as wide and as comprehensive as it possibly can. So in the budget that was presented by a government that is only 24 weeks in office, so what I initially expected things to be like as brief as it possibly can, simply because of the fact that the government was installed a bit delayed than how it was done in the past, considering also the fact that this is a new government. So you know, the formulation of their own policies would probably take time rather than having to continue all the programs and policies that was done by the previous government. So I would imagine them to have a couple of stages in addressing the budget. Number one is whether or not to continue past policies or programs by the previous government. Second of all is to introduce their own new policies that is in line with Buku Harapan. And thirdly is all about the revenue generation. How are they going to introduce introduce new measures for the government to raise revenues without having to address the elephant in the room, which is the GST.
Okay.
I think there is still much room for the government to introduce deeper reform, especially in the early years of a political cycle, rather than later years. So in this budget, I would expect them to go head on the issue on emoluments, particularly. But this will not come without its own costs. For example, if the government were to address emoluments, then it would also have to address how the government functions. So in this respect, I think the government would have to address how to make that transition towards the change in government structure, government delivery, and etc. So it will not be able to, well, the government will not be able to address many of these things in a span of 24, 25 weeks. So it would have to take a little bit more time than that. And for us to expect this, or rather everything to happen within the first 6 months or first 6 years of the administration will probably quite optimistic, I would say. I think we should also take note that budget is only an allocation. So once the allocation is approved, then it is still up to the relevant ministries to undertake their own programs and initiatives based on their own interests rather than the interests of the finance ministry. So in this respect, budget is only an announcement. Whether or not it will be carried out is still to be certain, well, probably in the next 12 months, not now. And I think there is a need for the public to be very attentive about how many of these allocations will be undertaken at the ministerial level rather than at the budget. I think the real litmus test to this budget announcement is not so much on the budget, but more on the economic activities derived from this budget announcement, and it will be translated into a report in the fiscal outlook report next year. So what I'm trying to say here is that we should focus more on the outcome of the government programs more rather than the announcement. I think what the government should do differently next year is not to focus so much on the budget announcement, but to focus more on the outcome of this year's budget next year, so that it will give the impression to the public that the planned programs are all carried out as how it was meant to be. And that's how I think the government should focus on next year rather than how it was done in the past.